is Tim Ash. It is May 18th, Monday. I'm the president of the Vermont State Senate here to talk about Vermont's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, give a bit of an update. I'm going to provide three brief updates today. The first is going to be a bit of a reminder for what's at stake from the public health point of view, even as we start to open up our economy. Second, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I hope to see in the governor's first draft of an economic recovery proposal, which we expect to be released on Wednesday. And then third, I'm going to talk briefly about how we expect the legislature to try to grapple with the great challenge that it has on its hands to fill the biggest budget hole in modern Vermont history. I'm not sure that there's ever been a financial challenge presented to the state quite like this ever. So let me start with the public health issue. Over the weekend, we had sort of mixed news. On Saturday, we had 8 new positive COVID-19 tests, which of course is unlike most of the last 2 or 3 weeks where we've had as few as 0, sometimes a couple. So 8 is a significant number for one day. It could be an outlier day, but nonetheless, there were 8 positive tests. On Sunday, 700 people had their tests come in from remote testing all over the state, and there were 0 positive tests. So that's why I say mixed information there. 8 one day, and then the next day, 700 people tested with 0 positives. So that all seems relatively consistent with our overall suppression of COVID-19. It's not gone. We still have people hospitalized, not that many. However, the reason to continue to be vigilant as we face this virus is really, we don't have to look farther than Plattsburgh to see what can happen if we let our guard down. Over the weekend, there were several parties apparently in Plattsburgh that were in larger numbers than are advised by public health experts. And as a result of those parties, 9 people contracted COVID-19 or were subsequently tested positive, and 27 more were deemed to have been in such close contact that those individuals are now forced to quarantine. So you can see how very quickly a few missteps can result in a pretty quick spread if people are in close quarters and interacting with lots of people, not social distancing. So while the news in Vermont continues to be generally positive in terms of the public health outcomes, it's worth remaining as vigilant as possible, keeping up with social distancing, mask wearing, and all that, so that we can not see the kind of outbreaks that happened in Plattsburgh over the weekend. Second issue I want to talk about is some of my hopes for the governor's first draft of an economic recovery package, which we expect to be released maybe Wednesday. The first thing I should say is that it is an unusual experience because on the one hand, we have a gaping hole in the budget of more than $430 million, but then we're sitting on a $1.25 billion federal check. Some people say, well, why don't you just use that money to cover the hole in the budget? And the short answer is that the federal government made one of the conditions of these funds that it can't be used to just cover normal budget expenses. It can only be used to pay for things that have some COVID connection, an expenditure like putting up a medical surge facility at the Champlain Valley Expo would be eligible. Additional health supplies to be distributed, whether it was sanitizer or masks, those would be eligible expenses because they are not part of our normal budget. So it means that the things that we can use that $1.25 billion for are not as expansive as we would hope. We've already spent about $150 million or so on the kinds of things I described: medical supplies, extra personnel costs to meet the public health challenge, especially in those first days, housing homeless individuals so that they could be in isolation and not be put in close quarters at high risk. So the question now is, with the remaining $1 to $1.1 billion, what should we do with those funds? And I'll just tell you a little bit about what I hope to see from the governor's proposed recovery package. The first thing I think that's really critical is that we have some kind of business relief package. I think it's clear that while our unemployment system was there to help people who were laid off pay their bills, and it helped self-employed and independent contractors, those who applied and finally got through to the Department of Labor, were able to receive funds and help pay their bills. Many businesses were able to avail themselves of federal small business programs, but not everyone. For instance, if you're in the restaurant or lodging industry, you and you're the owner of the business, those federal programs for businesses were not really tailored for you, especially if you were forced to close. So some of the people who have had nowhere to turn for the last 2 months now, and 2 months plus, have been those who have started small businesses, poured their lives into it, often taking relatively low salaries while they build up their businesses, and then now it's all put in peril because of this public health crisis. So my hope is that the governor's economic recovery package will substantially try to address the needs of very small businesses and small businesses that are a little bit bigger, to make sure that they have the funds they need to pay their basic bills. Obviously, when you have many thousands of businesses in Vermont, you can't customize a perfect solution for every single business. And we don't have time to have a red tape filled program that has wonderful goals but can't get money out the door for 5 years. The money needs to get out so people can pay bills now, so our economy doesn't collapse. So I believe we're going to have to come up with some basic contours of a business relief package to grant out dollars in a fair way that's quick, equitable, and goes to the businesses that have been unable to make money during this really difficult time. So that's where I hope a substantial chunk of the funds will go. Second, I hope that the governor's team will use this opportunity to deploy a number of the dollars from the federal government for the deployment of broadband to communities that are underserved today. Broadband, as in terms of broadband accessibility, we're much better off today than we were 10 years ago or 15 years ago for sure. But there are still pockets all throughout the state that do not have acceptable broadband. The state has not had the huge sums of money available to just go in and deliver perfect internet to every home. We've been making progress, but we have not gotten there. There's no question. What that means is that if you are a kid in a home that doesn't have broadband or wireless internet, your ability to learn remotely right now while schools are closed has been completely diminished, setting you back compared to your peers. If you are isolated from high quality internet and you need mental health counseling, or you need a physical health consult with your medical provider, and you can't do this kind of video interaction, it puts your either physical or mental health in jeopardy. Small business owners or people who work from home, if you do not have high-speed internet at home, you are basically precluded from really being successful working from home in general and for many professions. So my hope is that the governor will be able to put together a package of funds that will go for broadband deployment to meet those kinds of challenges. I also hope the governor's package will include a number of dollars that would go to school districts to make much needed physical improvements in their schools. Because COVID-19 is an airborne virus, it seems to me that we could be using funds to make significant mechanical upgrades in public schools throughout the state so that the air handling units and everything else are being repaired or replaced in ways that will reduce the potential spread of this or any other infection in the future. Also, school districts, many of them are operating on the thinnest of margins in their budgets, so this could be really welcome news and relief and put people to work. I also hope the governor's economic recovery package will include substantial funds to strengthen our local agricultural economy. Over the last number of years, one of the things I take pride in leading the Senate is we've made significant increased investments in local food production of all kinds. And what we've seen now is the vulnerability that people have in terms of food security, but also that entire food supply chains are being jeopardized as a result of what's going on. You just have to look at the meatpacking factories with COVID outbreaks all throughout the Midwest to see that. So my hope is that we will use the dollars to greatly strengthen local food production and the local purchasing of that local food. And we can be creative in the ways we do that so that it's COVID related. But I feel very strongly that this is an opportunity to do just that. And I hope we will make that long-term investment. There are a number of other things that I think would be great to do. My own personal view is that we should also substantially increase the number of work opportunities for young Vermonters using these relief funds. Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression put many thousands of young people, unfortunately at the time young men only, to work. We have wonderful programs in Vermont like the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, Vermont Works for Women, Youth Build, all of which take people who want to get hands-on professional skills that they can take with them for the rest of their lives and give them a meaningful experience, teach them how to work in teams, solve problems. And I believe this is an opportunity to go big in that regard, especially with so many people who are second guessing whether they're going to go to college this fall because of all the uncertainty. We do need to keep a contingency fund of funds in case things resurface later in the year that we haven't accounted for. Another outbreak would mean we need more resources for medical supplies, medical personnel, possibly law enforcement and other things who all pitch in, EMS, first responders. So that's some of what I hope to see in the governor's economic recovery package on Wednesday. The legislature will then be working with the governor and bringing any ideas that he's left off the table to see if they're desirable to include, and hopefully we'll be able to work in harmony and not at odds and make sure we're making long-term investments while meeting people's short-term needs. And then last, I'd like to say a quick word about how the legislature, as I see it, is going to have to start shifting its work to focus on the worst economic situation in Vermont history at this time. So I'll be very brief in describing what may be a little inside baseball, but I think it's important for those of you watching who are particularly interested in how we're going to get through this and get to the other side. When people like me are often interviewed by a TV camera or a newspaper reporter, we'll say, well, we've got a $430 million budget shortfall. Well, it's a big number, but it doesn't really communicate how we have to tackle that problem. So I'm going to give you the simplest summary of the problem as I can. And I'm going to use rough numbers. I may be off a little bit here and there, but the broad point is going to be true. We have 3 funds that operate state government in Vermont. Each of those funds receives money from different sources and can be used only for specific purposes. The first of them is the Transportation Fund. It's the smallest of the 3 I'm about to describe. It receives money from the tax we pay when we buy cars, for vehicle registrations, gas tax. That's the money coming in, and then it's used for road construction, public transit, alternatives to vehicle transportation, whether it's bike paths, pedestrian paths, sidewalk projects, all that. That fund is down $50 million right now, which is a significant downgrade, and we're going to have to figure out a way to get through the next year. So I believe we'll have to pull together a group of senators, House members, and some administration officials from our Agency of Transportation in the short term to start coming up with a series of options so people can understand what it would take to close that $50 million gap and make sure we still have safe roadways and continue to make positive strides on alternate forms of transportation. Second fund is the Education Fund. The Education Fund is roughly $1.6 billion. That might be slightly dated, but it's in that ballpark. Well, because of COVID-19, we now have a $120 million shortfall on that budget of $1.6 billion roughly, so a huge percentage. We are going to need to work with the teachers union representatives, superintendents, school board members, school principals association, administration, and legislature to come up with a range of options that can get us through that huge gap while not sacrificing the high quality public school system that we have in Vermont, continuing to meet the needs of kids who don't have family resources, who need public schools the most to give them an opportunity to fulfill their potential, and make sure that we don't do things that make the teaching profession undesirable or unviable. The last of the three funds is the state's general fund, and that is the part of government that does everything from healthcare programs to natural resources and environmental programs, everything from our tax department to human resources to the Department of Children and Families. A huge array of different government services are in the general fund. That's down more than $200 million on a budget of about $1.7 billion. So I don't want to dwell on the huge round numbers I'm mentioning, but more than $200 million is it's just huge. So we are going to have to team up with the state employees, with various groups that have a particular high stakes role in the well-being of state services and our state budget, with the administration, and come up with options there. Because there is no simple way to get over each of these three challenges I've just described. And I will challenge each of you, just like I've had to challenge myself, is that anybody who tells you there's a simple solution to any of the three things I've described is not telling it to you straight. This is going to take a whole number of difficult decisions in each of those three funds I've described: transportation, education, and the general fund. So it is a huge puzzle to put together so that we can get to the other side of this with the least damage done, while making sure we take care of people every step of the way, and hopefully in some ways using the dollars to have us well positioned moving forward, whether it's on broadband or our school facilities or local agriculture or youth employment. But it is going to take a lot of creativity. It's going to take a lot of teamwork and a lot of unity of purpose. And the good news is we've got a lot of people who are signed up for that kind of work. So with that, I'm going to sign off and see you every night this week at 5:30, and I hope you continue to stay safe.